Chapter 1. Hey guys, tonight we're stepping into the gritty, grimy world of medieval hygiene. Specifically, how people manage without something as basic as toilet paper. Picture yourself wandering into a bustling medieval town square. The cobblestones are uneven beneath your feet, the air thick with the tang of unwashed bodies, rotting food scraps, and something far less pleasant wafting from nearby alleys. You hear the clatter of hooves, the shouts of merchants, and the occasional splash of a chamber pot being emptied from a window above. Watch out. It's a harsh, nose-wrinkling reality check. And honestly, you probably won't survive this world's sanitation standards for more than a day without gagging. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, drop a comment with your location and local time. I'm curious where you're drifting off with me tonight. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background and let's ease into tonight's journey together. As you stand in this medieval mess of a town, the first thing that hits you, besides the smell, is how alien everything feels. You're in the 1200s, somewhere in Europe, and the concept of a clean restroom is centuries away. There's no soft two-ply waiting for you, no flushable convenience at your fingertips. Instead, you're surrounded by people who've adapted to a world where hygiene is more about survival than comfort. You glance around, noticing the muddy streets double as open sewers in some spots, and you can't help but wrinkle your nose. How did they even cope? Well, let's start with the basics of what you're smelling and why it's so bad. Personal cleanliness wasn't exactly a priority for most folks back then. Not because they loved being filthy, but because life was a constant grind. You're a peasant, let's say, working sunrise to sunset in the fields. You've got no time or resources to worry about scrubbing up when there's barley to harvest and a lord taxing half your yield. Let's paint the sensory picture a bit more. You trudge through the village, your rough woolen tunic scratching against your skin, already damp with sweat from a morning of hauling water from a questionable well. The well itself? Oh, it's probably just a few yards from where waste gets dumped, because medieval town planning didn't exactly scream health code. You pass a butcher's stall, where flies buzz over slabs of meat that have been hanging a little too long, and the ground is slick with who knows what. A modern aside here. If you've ever complained about a porta potty at a festival, just know you'd be begging for one right now. These folks didn't even have that luxury. And for a little chuckle, imagine trying to explain hand sanitizer to a medieval blacksmith. He'd probably think you're peddling witchy potions and chase you out of town with a hammer. Now, for a solid historical fact to ground us, sanitation in medieval Europe varied wildly by region and class, but for the average person, about 90% of whom were peasants, access to clean water was limited. Most villages relied on communal wells or nearby streams, often contaminated by human and animal waste. Bathing wasn't a daily ritual. It might happen once a week if you were lucky, and often only before a religious holiday or a big event. You're not dunking yourself in a hot shower. You're splashing cold, murky water from a wooden bucket, hoping it doesn't make you sicker than you already are from last week's mystery stew. Here's a quirky tidbit to chew on as you wander this smelly scene. Some medieval folks believed that too much bathing could actually harm you. They thought it opened your pores to bad air or miasmas, which they blamed for diseases like the plague. So, while you're tempted to dunk your head in the nearest barrel just to escape the stench, your medieval neighbor might warn you against it, muttering about how you'll catch your death. It's kind of hilarious in a sad way, right? You're stuck between smelling like a barn and risking some imaginary curse just for a rinse. I can almost hear you telling them, "Buddy, it's not the air, it's the fact you haven't washed your hands since Easter." And speaking of debates, historians still argue whether this aversion to bathing was universal or exaggerated by later accounts. Some sources claim monks and nuns, for instance, value cleanliness as part of spiritual purity, with certain orders mandating regular washes. Others point to town records showing public bathhouses in larger cities like London or Paris, though these were often more for the wealthy or, let's whisper this, sometimes fronts for less than holy activities. So, were medieval people as dirty as the stereotypes make out, or are we just projecting our modern squeamishness onto them? It's a question that keeps scholars up at night, though probably not as much as the fleas kept medieval folks awake. As you keep walking through this town, you notice something else. Personal space isn't really a thing. You're shoulder to shoulder with folks who haven't seen soap in weeks, and the concept of "excuse me" doesn't seem to exist when someone brushes past with a cart full of dubious-looking turnips. You start to wonder about the nitty-gritty. How do they handle the most basic of human needs without the stuff we take for granted? You know, the unmentionable moments after a meal of watery porridge and questionable ale, without giving away too much of what's coming later. Let's just say you're in for a surprise when you find out what passes for bathroom etiquette around here. Imagine trying to keep your dignity while squatting over a ditch with an audience of stray dogs and nosy neighbors. If that's not a wake-up call to appreciate your porcelain throne at home, I don't know what is. Let's toss in another light moment to ease the tension. Picture yourself at a medieval tavern, downing a mug of weak ale, because water might literally kill you with bacteria, and overhearing two peasants debating the best spot to do their business. One swears by the riverbank for the breeze. The other grumbles that pigs keep stealing his spot in the woods. You can't help but laugh under your breath, though you're also mentally planning the fastest route back to the 21st century. And hey, speaking of rivers, don't get too comfy thinking they're just for picturesque strolls. You'll see soon enough how they double as, let's call it, multi-purpose zones. For now, though, you're still taking the sights and smells of this medieval mess. You glance at a nearby house, its thatched roof sagging, and its walls made of wattle and daub, basically sticks and mud. You can see through the open door that the floor inside is just packed dirt, strewn with straw that hasn't been changed in who knows how long. That's where families sleep, eat, and yep, sometimes relieve themselves if the weather's too rough to step outside. Privacy? Forget it. You're sharing this tiny space with your spouse, your 5 kids, and probably a goat or 2 for warmth. A modern comparison might be camping in a cramped tent during a rainstorm, except this tent smells like decades of unwashed socks, and there's no exit strategy. As the day drags on, you feel the grime building up on your own skin. You've been tromping through mud that's probably mixed with things you don't want to think about, and your hands are sticky from grabbing a hunk of coarse bread from a shared loaf at the market. You're starting to get why hygiene isn't top of mind. Survival trumps everything. Still, you can't shake the itch to find some way to clean up, or at least figure out how these folks manage the most basic bodily functions without the modern tools you're so used to. You're curious, maybe a little horrified, about what's waiting around the next corner of this pungent little world. So, linger here in this moment with me. Feel the weight of the day settling into your bones, the distant clanging of a blacksmith's hammer fading as the sun dips low. You're not just smelling history, you're living it one gritty, unwashed step at a time. And trust me, as we keep wandering through this medieval maze, you're going to uncover some downright wild ways they handled life's messier moments. Stick with me, and let's keep exploring this stinky, fascinating past together. Chapter 2. You're still trudging through this medieval town, the air heavy with that unmistakable mix of sweat, smoke, and something you'd rather not identify. Your boots, or rather, the rough leather wraps pretending to be boots, squish into the muddy street with every step, and you're starting to accept that personal freshness is a lost cause here. But now, your mind wanders to a pressing question, one that's been nagging at you since you caught a whiff of this place. How on earth do these folks manage without toilet paper? Yes, that modern marvel you've never appreciated more than right now. You're about to find out as we dive into the raw, earthy solutions they relied on when nature called in a world without Charmin. Picture yourself after a meager meal of barley gruel and a dubious piece of salted fish, feeling that familiar urgency. There's no private bathroom waiting for you, no neatly folded stack of soft tissue. Instead, you're glancing around, maybe a little panicky, looking for a discreet spot. Most likely, you're heading toward the edge of the village or a nearby patch of woods, if you're lucky enough to live near one. And here's where nature becomes your best friend, or at least your most accessible tool. Leaves are the go-to for many. You spot a broad, sturdy leaf from an oak, or maybe a softer one from a hazel tree, and you, well, make do. It's not exactly a spa experience. I'll give you that. Imagine the scratchy texture, the questionable cleanliness of something you just plucked from the ground, and the very real chance of grabbing a stinging nettle by mistake. Ouch! A little modern sarcasm here. If you've ever grumbled about running out of TP mid-roll at home, just know you'd be praying for even a single square right now. But leaves aren't the only option in your medieval toolkit. If you're near a stream or river, moss becomes a surprisingly popular choice. You crouch by the water's edge, the damp chill seeping into your knees to your threadbare hose, and scoop up a clump of soft, spongy moss. It's nature's wet wipe, more or less, though let's not pretend it's sterile. The texture might be gentler than a leaf, but you're also risking whatever critters or muck live in that patch of green. And here's a light chuckle for you. Imagine explaining to your medieval self that one day, people pay extra for organic wipes when you're out here literally foraging for bathroom supplies. You'd probably think future you has lost it. Let's anchor this with a mainstream historical fact. While written records about personal hygiene are scarce, because honestly, who was documenting bathroom habits in the 1300s? Archaeological evidence and surviving texts suggest that natural materials like leaves, moss, and even grass were indeed common substitutes for toilet paper across medieval Europe. In rural areas, where most of the population lived, people turned to whatever was abundant and free. You didn't have a corner store to pop into. You had a forest or field, and you adapted. This wasn't just a European thing either. Similar practices popped up in cultures worldwide before paper became a widespread hygiene product much later. Now, for a quirky tidbit that might make you smirk. In some coastal areas, particularly among folks living near beaches, dried seaweed or even smooth shells were occasionally used. Yep, you heard that right. Shells. Imagine wincing as you figure out the logistics of that one. Hoping you've picked a nice, smooth clam shell and not a jagged oyster edge. It's the kind of detail that reminds you just how desperate things could get when options were slim. I can almost picture you holding one up, squinting at it by the dim light of the setting sun, muttering, well, this better work, before bracing yourself. It's not glamorous, but hey, it's history in its rawest form. And of course, there's room for scholarly debate here. Historians still argue whether the reliance on natural materials was universal or if some communities had more innovative solutions we've yet to uncover. Some point to the possibility of regional differences. Maybe those in drier climates struggled more with finding suitable plants and turned to other methods, while wetland dwellers had moss galore. Others wonder if certain groups, like traveling merchants or soldiers, carried personal supplies we don't have records of. It's a murky topic, pun intended, because so much of daily life went unrecorded, especially the stuff deemed too mundane or improper to write about. What do you think? Would you have stuck to leaves or gone hunting for something better? As you adjust to this leafy reality, you start noticing the little details of how it all plays out. You're not just grabbing any random plant. After all, there's an art to it, or at least a desperate kind of trial and error. You learn pretty quick which bushes to avoid. Anything prickly or suspiciously shiny is a hard no. You're also hyper-aware of privacy or the lack thereof. You're squatting behind a hedge, hoping no one wanders by mid-moment. Because village life means everyone's business is, well, everyone's business. The wind picks up, carrying the scent of damp earth and nearby livestock, and you're just trying to focus on not embarrassing yourself further. A little humor to lighten the mood. It's like the worst camping trip ever, except there's no esmores waiting afterward, just a long walk back to a straw mattress that smells worse than you do. You're also starting to realize that this isn't a one-size-fits-all situation. If you're a kid, maybe you don't even bother with leaves half the time. Dirt's everywhere, and who's going to notice a little more? If you're older or have any kind of ailment, though, this whole process gets even trickier. There's no accessibility considerations, no gentle options for sensitive skin. You just grit your teeth and get on with it, hoping tomorrow's load of chores distracts you from the discomfort. And let's toss in another joke to keep things breezy. Imagine trying to pitch biodegradable wipes to a medieval crowd. Hey, it's just like moss but fancier. You'd probably get laughed out of the village or accused of sorcery. The day wears on, and you're still processing this raw approach to hygiene. You glance at your hands, now streaked with dirt from foraging your supplies, and wonder how often they even get washed. Spoiler, not nearly often enough. The stream you passed earlier might double as your cleaning station, but it's also where folks wash their clothes, water their animals, and yep, sometimes dump their waste. It's a vicious cycle, and you're stuck right in the middle of it. A modern aside to connect with you. Think about how much we fret over hand washing today. Those 20-second scrubs with scented soap. Now, imagine explaining that obsession to someone who thinks a quick splash in a muddy brook is peak cleanliness. Mind-blowing, right? But beyond the logistics of leaves and moss, there's a mental shift happening as you adapt to this world. You're starting to see why hygiene isn't the priority you'd expect. Every moment of your day is consumed by survival. Fetching water that might make you sick, scrounging for food that might not last a week, dodging the tax collector who might take what little you have. In that grind, fussing over a post-bathroom routine feels almost laughable. You're not lazy or careless. You're just stretched thin in a way that's hard to grasp until you've lived it, even in your imagination like this. So, you stand up from your makeshift spot, brushing stray bits of leaf off your rough tunic, and take a deep breath of that less than fresh medieval air. You've survived this small but significant challenge, at least for now. But there's more to uncover about how these folks manage their messy lives. The stench of the village still clings to you, a constant reminder that cleanliness, as you know it, is a distant dream here. Your curiosity is piqued, though. There's got to be more to this story than just plucking plants. And trust me, as we keep wandering through this grimy past, the solutions only get wilder. Stick with me, and let's see what other surprises await in this unwashed world. Chapter 3. You're still meandering through this medieval village. The mud clinging to your worn-out shoes, the air thick with the kind of smells that make you wish for a gas mask. You've just wrapped your head around the whole leaves and moss situation for personal hygiene, and while you're not exactly thrilled about it, you're starting to get the hang of this rough-around-the-edges life. But now, a new question bubbles up as you wipe a bead of sweat, or is it grime, from your brow. How do these folks even bathe? You're feeling the itch of days without a proper wash, and the idea of a hot shower feels like a cruel fantasy. Let's dive into the chilly, rare reality of medieval bathing and see how you'd manage to get even a little clean in a world where soap is a luxury and hot water is basically a myth. Imagine it's been a week, or maybe 2, since you last felt anything resembling clean. Your skin is caked with dust from the fields, your hair is a matted mess, and you got that sticky, uncomfortable feeling that comes from too many hours in the same scratchy tunic. You're desperate for a rinse, but here's the catch. Bathing isn't the casual daily ritual you're used to. For most peasants, it's an event, something tied to special occasions or sheer necessity. You're not hopping into a tiled bathroom with fluffy towels waiting. Instead, you're eyeing a wooden bucket in the corner of your cramped, dirt floor hut, or maybe a nearby stream if the weather isn't freezing your fingers off. The water? Cold as heck, straight from a well or river, and probably carrying a suspicious tint. A little modern sarcasm for you. If you've ever whined about a lukewarm shower at a cheap motel, just wait until you're dunking yourself in what feels like liquid ice. Bonus points if there's a frog staring at you from the shallows. Let's set the scene a bit more vividly. It's a rare day when you've got a moment to spare, maybe a Sunday after trudging to village church for a sermon you barely understood. You decide it's time to tackle the grime. You haul a bucket of water from the communal well, sloshing half of it onto your already damp legs as you stumble back to your hut. There's no privacy here. Your kids are running around. Your spouse is mending a torn sleeve, and the neighbor's goat keeps poking its head to the open doorway. You strip down to a linen undergarment, if you're lucky enough to have one, and start splashing the icy water over yourself with a rag that's seen better days. The cold bites into your skin, making you gasp, and you're pretty sure this quick rinse is doing more to shock your system than to actually clean anything. Here's a light chuckle to ease the shiver. Imagine trying to sell a medieval peasant on the concept of a bubble bath. Hey, just add some lavender oil and relax. They'd probably think you're cracked, and then steal the oil to cook with. Now, for a grounded historical fact to anchor us, bathing in medieval Europe was indeed far less frequent than in other historical periods, like the Roman era with its famous bathhouses. For most of the medieval population, again, largely peasants, Daily or even weekly baths were impractical due to labor involved in heating water and the lack of dedicated spaces. Larger towns might have public bathhouses, especially by the later Middle Ages, but these were often expensive and sometimes had a, let's say, questionable reputation as places for more than just washing. For you, as a commoner in a rural hamlet, a bath might happen once a month, often tied to religious or seasonal rituals like before Easter or a harvest festival. And forget about soap as you know it. If you've got any, it's a harsh, lye-based lump made from animal fat and ashes, more likely to strip your skin than soothe it. Here's a quirky little tidbit to make you smirk. In some regions, particularly in colder northern areas, people occasionally used snow to bathe when water was too scarce or frozen. Yes, snow. Picture yourself scooping up a handful of the white stuff on a biting winter morning, rubbing it over your arms and face like it's some kind of medieval exfoliant. It's freezing, it melts into a drip of mess, and you're probably no cleaner than when you started. But hey, at least you're awake now. I can just imagine you standing there, teeth chattering, wondering if frostbite counts as a spa treatment. It's the kind of desperation that reminds you how tough these folks had it when even basic necessities were a struggle. And speaking of debates, historians still argue whether the infrequency of bathing was due purely to practicality or if cultural beliefs played a bigger role. Some sources suggest that certain religious teachings warned against excessive bathing, claiming it led to vanity or exposed the body to harmful humors in the air. Others argue that this is overstated, pointing to evidence of communal bathhouses and even personal hygiene rules in monastic communities. So, were you avoiding a wash because you can't be bothered to haul water, or because the local priest muttered something about sin? It's a puzzle that keeps scholars scratching their heads, much like you're scratching at the dirt that just won't budge. As you stand there, dripping and shivering from your half-hearted bucket bath, you can't help but notice how ineffective this whole process feels. The water's already murky from the first splash, and your rag is just redistributing the grime rather than removing it. You catch a whiff of yourself and realize you might smell worse now, like wet will mix with whatever's floating in that bucket. Another light joke to keep things breezy. It's like trying to clean your car with a muddy sponge. Except the car is you, and there's no detailing shop for miles. You're starting to see why folks might just skip this step altogether and call it a day. You also notice the social element, or lack thereof, in this bathing ordeal. There's no leisurely soak with a podcast in the background, no locking the door for a private moment. If you're using a stream, you're likely joined by half the village, everyone awkwardly ignoring each other while they scrub in the same icy flow. Kids are splashing nearby. Someone's washing their laundry downstream, and you're just trying to keep your balance on the slippery rocks. It's a communal experience in the worst way, and you're hyper-aware of every glance. A modern aside to bridge the gap. Think about how we guard our bathroom privacy today, with locked doors and do not disturb vibes. Now imagine doing your best to freshen up, while your neighbor's pig snuffles around your ankles. Different times, different priorities. The day drags on and you're still damp, now feeling the chill settle into your bones as the weak sun does little to warm you. You've bathed, sure, but the grime feels like it's baked into your very soul at this point. You glance at your hands, still rough and stained from field work, and wonder there's even a point to this sporadic ritual. Cleanliness isn't just about comfort here. It's a luxury, something you might dream of but can't afford in time or resources. And let's toss in one more joke for good measure. Imagine a medieval influencer vlogging their self-care routine. Smash that like button if you also bathe with river water and a side of existential dread. Yeah, they wouldn't last a day on social media. But beyond the physical struggle, there's a mental toll to this bathing scarcity. You're starting to internalize the idea that dirt is just part of life. It's on your skin, in your hair, under your nails, and you're too worn out from chopping wood or mending fences to care most days. Survival trumps vanity, and even basic comfort feels out of reach. You're not judging yourself or others for the state you're in. It's just the way things are. Still, as you pull your damp tunic back on, you can't shake the longing for something better, something warmer, something that doesn't leave you feeling like a half-drowned rat. So, you shake off the last drops of that frigid water, the village sound of clanging tools and bleeding animals pulling you back to reality. You've caught a glimpse of how rare and rough bathing is in this world, a far cry from the steamy showers you're used to. But there's more to this hygiene puzzle, more gritty details of medieval life waiting around the corner. The smells and struggles of this place still cling to you, a constant nudge that there's no escaping the mess just yet. Hang with me, and let's keep peeling back the layers of this unwashed, fascinating past. Chapter 4. You're still wandering to the heart of this medieval village. The ever-present stench of unwashed bodies and rotting scraps clinging to the air like a stubborn fog. You brave the scratchy reality of leaves for hygiene and shiver through a half-hearted, icy bath. But now your curiosity shifts to a bigger, Messier picture. Where does all the waste go? You've noticed the mud in the streets isn't just mud, and those suspicious puddles aren't from last night's rain. Let's plunge into crude, often chaotic systems for handling human waste in this era. Spoiler alert, it's not pretty, and there's no sanitation department to call when things get out of hand. Imagine yourself trudging along the edge of the village. Try to avoid the worst of the muck underfoot. You just taking care of business in a discreet, if you can call it that, spot behind a scraggly bush, using whatever nature provided, as we've covered. But now, you're wondering what happens next. There's no flush, no septic tank, no handy trash bin labeled biohazard. For most folks, especially in rural areas like this, the solution is as basic as it gets. You dig a shallow hole or find a ditch and leave it there. Nature's supposed to take care of the rest. But with so many people crammed into small spaces, it doesn't always work out. You glance around and see that the outskirts of the village are basically an open landfill for human and animal waste alike. The smell hits you like a punch, a sour, heavy cloud that makes your eyes water. A little modern snark here. If you've ever grumbled about taking out the garbage, just be thankful you're not tasked with carting. Well, let's just say medieval recycling to the edge of town. Let's zoom in on the sensory grit of this moment. You're standing near a ditch that runs alongside a patchy field, and it's clear this is the unofficial dumping ground. The ground is slick, buzzing with flies that seem way too happy to be there, and the faint gurgle of stagnant water, or worse, mixes with the squawk of nearby chickens pecking at who knows what. Sometimes, if you're in a slightly more organized spot, there might be a cesspit, a hole dug specifically for waste, often shared by a few households. But it's not like anyone's maintaining it. When it fills up, you either dig a new one, or more likely, just ignore the problem until it overflows. Picture yourself holding your breath as you tip a chip chamber pot into one of these pits, the contents splashing with a sound you'll never unhear. And for a light chuckle to cut the tension, imagine trying to pitch a medieval Kickstarter for plumbing. Back my idea for underground pipes. You'd be laughed out of the tavern, or burned as a witch for suggesting something so unnatural. Now, let's ground this with solid historical fact. In medieval Europe, formal waste disposal systems were almost non-existent for the majority of people, especially outside of larger towns or cities. Rural villages relied on cesspits, open ditches, or simply the nearest river to deal with human waste. In urban areas, things weren't much better. Waste was often dumped straight into the streets or nearby waterways, leading to contamination and disease. By the later Middle Ages, some towns started implementing basic regulations, like fines for dumping waste in public spaces. But enforcement was spotty at best. So, as you stand there wrinkling your nose, remember you're living in a time when out of sight, out of mind was the closest thing to a sanitation policy. Here's a quirky tidbit to make you raise an eyebrow. In some medieval towns, particularly in England, there were actual jobs dedicated to waste removal. People called gong firmers or night soilmen who, for a fee, would empty cesspits under cover of darkness. Imagine meeting one of these brave or desperate souls as you pass by a darkened alley. They're hauling buckets of, let's call it unpleasant cargo, their faces wrapped in cloths to block the stench, trudging off to dump it outside the town walls or into a river. It's not a glamorous gig, probably the least desirable job in the medieval hierarchy, but someone had to do it. I can picture you tipping your imaginary hat to them, muttering, "Better you than me, pal," while speed walking the other direction. And of course, there's room for scholarly debate here. Historians still argue whether the lack of proper sanitation was purely a logistical failing, or if cultural attitudes toward waste played a role. Some suggest that medieval people didn't fully grasp the link between poor sanitation and disease, operating under the miasma theory that blamed bad air rather than contaminated water or physical filth. Others point to evidence of early attempt at organization, like shared latrines in monasteries or town edicts about waste dumping, as proof that at least some understood the need for better systems. So, as you dodge another suspicious puddle, are you suffering because no one cares, or because no one knows better? It's a question that keeps academics buzzing, much like the flies around that cesspit. You keep moving, try to escape the worst of the stench, but it's everywhere. In the village center, you notice folks tossing the contents of chamber pots out of upper windows with a casual shout of warning. If you're lucky, you flinch as a splash lands way too close for comfort, the cobblestones glistening with something you don't want to examine. It's not just human waste either. Animal dung from pigs, horses, and cows mixes into the mess, turning the street into a slippery biohazard. Let's toss in another light joke to keep from gagging. Imagine a medieval city planner pitching poop-free zones. The crowd would probably riot or slip on their way to the meeting. You're starting to see why shoes don't last long around here, and why you're always one step away from a very unpleasant fall. The lack of proper systems also means there's no real boundary between living spaces and waste. You pass by a family's hovel, and right outside their door is a pile of refuse. Kitchen scraps, broken pottery, and worse. It's not laziness. It's just that there's nowhere else to put it. If you're near a river or stream, that becomes a go-to-dump spot, which explains why the water you're fetching for cooking or drinking often tastes off. A modern aside to connect with you. Think about how we stress over recycling bins and compost rules today. Now imagine your only option is yeeting everything into the nearest brook, hoping it magically disappears. It's a different kind of environmental impact, one you're living firsthand. As the day wears on, you're growing increasingly aware of how this mess affects everything. Your clothes, already rough and patched, pick up the grime of the streets with every step. Your hands, sticky from a quick meal of bread and broth, don't feel much cleaner after a splash in that questionable stream. You're starting to internalize the idea that filth is inescapable. It's in the air, on the ground, in the very rhythm of life. And here's one more joke to lighten the load. Picture yourself as a medieval health inspector, clipboard in hand, shutting down the whole village for unsanitary conditions. You'd have no village left to inspect by the end of the day. But beyond the sensory overload, there's a deeper toll to this lack of sanitation. You're not just smelling the problem. You're living in a world where it shapes your health, your daily routine, even your social interactions. You avoid certain alleys not because of robbers, but because the stench, or worse, might knock you out. You're learning to hold your breath, step lightly, and pray the next rain washes some of this away, though it usually just turns the streets into a sludgier nightmare. It's a grim cycle, and you're stuck right in the middle of it, with no modern solutions to save the day. So, you take a cautious step around yet another dubious patch of ground, the distant sound of a cartwheel creaking and a dog barking pulling you back to the moment. You've seen how waste is handled or mishandled in this unwashed world, and it's clear there's no easy fix. But there's more to this hygiene saga, more layers of medieval life waiting to be uncovered. The smells and struggles still surround you, a constant reminder that cleanliness is a battle few are winning here. Stay with me, and let's keep navigating this messy, fascinating past together. Chapter 5. You're still plodding through the muddy lanes of this medieval village, the ever-present aroma of waste and sweat a constant companion. You figured out the makeshift solutions for personal hygiene with leaves, shivered through a rare icy bath, and dodged the grim reality of open ditches for waste disposal. But now, your mind circles back to those private moments after a meal of watery gruel, when nature calls with no modern conveniences to answer. You've heard whispers of something beyond leaves and moss, something reusable, something a bit less wild. Let's unravel the curious world of fabric scraps and other materials as early hygiene tools, and see how you'd manage with these decidedly unsoft options in a time before disposable comforts. Picture yourself in a slightly better off household, maybe not a noble's castle, but a step above the dirt floor hovel of a peasant. You're in the home of a craftsman or a small merchant, where there's just enough extra to afford a few scraps of cloth. Old, worn out bits of linen or wool from a torn tunic or a patched blanket, after taking care of business in a corner of the yard or over a rickety wooden seat above a cesspit. You don't reach for a leaf. Instead, you grab one of these tattered rags, kept near the makeshift latrine area for just this purpose. It's rough against your skin, not exactly the plush cotton you're dreaming of, and definitely not single use. Yep, you, or more likely, the women of the household, will rinse it out in a bucket of cold water later, if you're diligent, and hang it to dry for the next round. A little modern sarcasm to ease a cringe. If you've ever griped about folding laundry, imagine laundering this kind of load. You'd be booking a one-way ticket back to the 21st century, stat. Let's linger on the sensory details for a moment. The cloth in your hand is frayed at the edges, stained from repeated use despite someone's best efforts to scrub it with ash and water. It smells faintly of dampness and something less pleasant, even after a rinse, because medieval cleaning methods aren't exactly antibacterial. You grimace as you use it, feeling the coarse texture scrape against you, a far cry from the softness you're used to. Afterward, you toss it into a chipped wooden bowl half filled with murky water, knowing it'll sit there until someone braves the task of washing it. The whole process feels like a chore in itself, and you're already dreading the next time. Here's a light chuckle to break the tension. Imagine trying to market these rags as eco-friendly reusable wipes to a medieval crowd. They just stare at you like, what else would we do with them? While you quietly sob for some two-ply. Now, for a firm historical fact to keep us grounded, while cloth as a hygiene tool wasn't universal, most peasants couldn't spare the material. It did appear in some medieval households, particularly among the slightly wealthier or in urban settings where natural alternatives like leaves were harder to come by. Surviving records, like household inventories from the later Middle Ages, occasionally mention rags or old cloth designated for personal use, though they rarely spell out the gritty details. Often, these scraps were a byproduct of worn-out clothing, too tattered for repair, but still useful for something. So, as you hold this rough piece of linen, you're tapping into a small but practical piece of medieval resourcefulness, where nothing went to waste, not even for the messiest tasks. Here's a quirky tidbit to make you quirk a brow. In some monastic communities, where cleanliness was tied to spiritual purity, there's evidence that monks used specific cloths or even shared woolen pads for hygiene, sanitized as best they could with boiling water or vinegar when possible. Picture yourself in a quiet monastery courtyard, the air carrying the faint scent of herbs from a nearby garden, as you and your fellow monks take turns with communal cloth, trying not to think too hard about who used it last. It's a bizarre kind of bonding, and I can just see you whispering a quick prayer for sanitation while you wait your turn. It's not luxurious, but it shows even holy men had to get creative with limited resources. And of course, there's space for scholarly debate. Historians still argue whether the use of cloth for hygiene was a widespread practice or limited to specific groups and regions. Some suggest it was more common in warmer, drier areas where plant-based options were scarce, while others point to cultural differences. Perhaps certain communities saw reusable materials as a sign of status or practicality, while others stuck to disposable nature. There's also the question of how often these cloths were actually cleaned. Were you risking infection every time, or did some households have better habits than we assume? It's a murky topic, much like that rinse water, and one that keeps academics puzzling over sparse evidence. As you set the cloth aside, you can't help but feel the weight of repetition in this task. It's not just the act itself. It's the knowledge that you're tied to the cycle of use, rinse, repeat, with no escape from the grime it represents. You glance at the bucket of water, already looking dubious after one use, and wonder who stuck with the job of refreshing it. Probably not you, if you can dodge the chore, but someone's got to deal with it. Let's toss in another light joke to keep things bearable. Imagine a medieval kid whining, "Do I have to wash the butt rags today?" You'd probably sympathize a little too much while pretending not to hear them. It's a small, grim slice of domestic life, but it's your reality right now. You also start to notice the social dynamics around this practice. If you're in a shared household or a tighter-knit community, there's no hiding what these rags are for. They're part of the daily grind, and no one bats an eye. Privacy isn't a concept you can afford when everyone's crammed into the same small space, and you're all in the same unwashed boat. A modern aside to connect with you. Think about how we guard our bathroom habits today, with air fresheners and discreet packaging. Now, picture your entire family knowing exactly which scrap you just used, because it's drying on a line right outside the door. It's a level of exposure that makes you itch just thinking about it. The day drags on, and you're still grappling with the tactile discomfort of this whole setup. Your hands feel grubbier from handling the cloth, and you're pretty sure a quick splash from that same questionable bucket isn't doing much to help. You're starting to see why so many folks might just stick to leaves, even with the splinters. Disposable feels like a dream compared to this endless loop of reuse. And here's one more joke to lighten the mood. Imagine pitching a medieval infomercial for fabric softener. Make your hygiene rags cuddly again. You probably get a blank stare or a bucket of rinse water thrown at you for wasting time on nonsense. But beyond the physical awkwardness, there's a mental adjustment happening. You're realizing that even this small step up from nature's offerings comes with its own burdens. Cloth might be more civilized than moss, but it ties you to extra labor, extra mess, extra reminders of how far you are from true cleanliness. You're not just using a rag. You're wrestling with a world where every tiny comfort has a hidden cost, whether it's time, effort, or the sheer will to keep going. It's humbling, in a gritty, unpleasant sort of way. So, you step away from that chip bowl and its unappealing contents, the distant clatter of village life pulling you back to the present. You got a first-hand feel for how fabric scraps served as a rough-and-ready hygiene tool, a small but telling piece of medieval ingenuity. But there's more to this unwashed puzzle, more corners of daily life waiting to surprise you with their rawness. The smells and struggles of this place still linger, a nudge that cleanliness is a fight you're barely winning. Hang with me, and let's keep uncovering the messy layers of this fascinating past. Chapter 6. You're still weaving through the narrow, muddy paths of this medieval village, the persistent whiff of grime and waste trailing you like a shadow. You've grappled with leaves and moss, shivered through icy baths, dodged the chaos of open ditches, and wrestled with the rough reality of reusable cloth scraps for hygiene. But now, your attention shifts to a new layer of this unwashed world. Where do people even go when nature calls, especially in crowded settings? Let's step into the awkward, often cramped universe of shared latrines and public facilities, and see how you navigate the social minefield of communal relief in a time when privacy is a foreign concept. Imagine yourself in a slightly larger town now, not the rural hamlet with its bushes and ditches, but a bustling market center where houses are packed tighter than a modern subway at rush hour. You got that urgent feeling after a hurried meal of coarse bread and ale, and there's no quiet corner of the woods to slip away to. Instead, you're heading toward a communal latrine, a rudimentary setup, often just a long wooden bench with holes cut into it, perched over a cesspit or a ditch that's seen better days. You approach with a mix of dread and resignation, the stench hitting you before you even see the structure. There's a line, of course, because even medieval bathrooms have peak hours, and you're trying not to make eye contact with the grizzled old man in front of you or the chatty woman beside him, a little modern snark to ease the discomfort. If you've ever complained about a gas station restroom, just wait until you're elbow to elbow with strangers over a literal pit of despair. You'd trade that sticky floor for this any day. Let's paint the sensory picture a bit sharper. The latrine is tucked near the edge of town, or sometimes uncomfortably close to living quarters. The air thick with a smell that could knock out a horse. The bench creaks under the weight of multiple users, the wood splintered and worn from years of neglect, and you're gripping the edge to keep your balance while pretending this isn't happening. Below, the cesspit gurgles ominously, and you're praying it doesn't overflow mid-visit. A very real risk. Flies buzz around like they own the place, and there's no wall or curtain to shield you from the person next to you, who's currently humming a tuneless song as if this is a normal hangout spot. Here's a light chuckle to break the cringe. Imagine trying to start a casual convo here. So, nice weather today, huh? You probably get a grunt or a splash before they ignore you completely. Now, for a solid historical fact to ground us, communal latrines were indeed a feature in larger medieval towns and cities, especially by the 12th and 13th centuries, as populations grew and open spaces for waste disposal shrank. Archaeological finds, like those in medieval London, reveal public latrines built over streams or pits, often funded by town councils or attached to markets and monasteries. These facilities could serve dozens of people at once, with some seating up to 10 or more, though seating is a generous term for a plank with holes. For you, squirming on this rickety bench, this is the closest thing to public infrastructure, even if it feels more like public humiliation. Here's a quirky tidbit to make you smirk. In some medieval cities, particularly in densely packed areas like Paris, public latrines occasionally doubled as social hubs. Yes, really. People would chat, gossip, or even settle minor disputes while perched there, treating it like a bizarre town square. Picture yourself trying to focus on the task at hand while the guy next to you rants about his neighbor's pig eating his cabbages. It's awkward, it's absurd, and I can just see you muttering under your breath, "Can we not do this now?" while wishing for a soundproof stall. It's a strange glimpse into how medieval folks normalize what we consider deeply private, mostly out of sheer necessity. And of course, there's room for scholarly debate. Historians still argue whether communal latrines were seen as a practical solution or a begrudging necessity in medieval society. Some sources suggest they were a point of civic pride in larger towns, evidence of early urban planning, while others argue they were often neglected, poorly maintained, and a breeding ground for disease. There's also debate over how accessible they were. Did poorer folks even use them, or were they relegated to the streets and alleys while wealthier citizens had private options? So, as you shift uncomfortably on this splintered bench, are you sitting in a marvel of medieval engineering or a public health disaster? It's a question that keeps academics puzzling, much like you're puzzling over how to escape the situation with your dignity intact. You're still perched there, counting the seconds until you can bolt, when you notice a complete lack of etiquette. There's no "excuse me" or subtle cough to signal your presence, just a shoulder-to-shoulder free-for-all. Someone's kid is running around nearby, dangerously close to the pit, while a woman argues loudly with her husband about whose turn it is to empty the family chamber pot. You're trying to block it all out, staring at the horizon like it'll teleport you somewhere else, but there's no escaping the chaos. Let's toss in another light joke to keep things bearable. Imagine installing a medieval occupied sign here. You'd need a whole guard just to stop folks from ignoring it, and they'd still barge in anyway. The social awkwardness isn't the only issue. You can't help but notice the state of this place. The bench hasn't been cleaned in, well, ever, probably, and the cesspit below is a nightmare waiting to happen. If it overflows, which happens more often than anyone admits, the mess spills into nearby streets or water sources, and you're back to that grim cycle of contamination you've already seen too much of. A modern aside to connect with you. Think about how we freak out over a clogged public toilet today, with signs and out-of-order notices. Now imagine your only option is a shared hole that's one bad day away from becoming a swamp. It's a level of deal with it you're not prepared for. As the crowd thins out, you finally get a moment to breathe, though the air isn't exactly refreshing. You're starting to see how these communal spaces shape more than just hygiene. They shape how you interact, how you see your neighbors, how you grit your teeth through life's less pleasant necessities. It's not just about the act itself. It's about losing any shred of personal space in a world where everything is shared, whether you like it or not. And here's one more joke to lighten the load. Picture a medieval Yelp review for this latrine. 1 star, terrible ambience, but great community vibes. You probably nod in reluctant agreement while planning your escape. But beyond the physical discomfort, there's a mental strain to this setup. You're hyper-aware of every sound, every glance, every shared second in this exposed space. You're learning to tune it out, to focus on getting to the moment, but it wears on you in a quiet way. Privacy isn't just a luxury here. It's a fantasy, something you can't even dream of when survival demands you share every gritty detail of life. It's a raw lesson in how medieval folks adapted to a world that offered no room for personal boundaries. So, you step away from that creaky bench, the stench still clinging to your clothes as the chatter of the town pulls you back to reality. You've endured the social gauntlet of communal latrine, a stark reminder of how little solitude this era allows. But there's more to this hygiene story, more angles of medieval life waiting to surprise you with their harshness. The smells and struggles still surround you, a nudge at cleanliness and privacy are battles far from won. Stay with me, and let's keep exploring the unwashed corners of this fascinating past. Chapter 7. You're still navigating the crowded, smelly streets of this medieval town, the lingering discomfort of communal latrines and crude hygiene practices sticking with you like the mud on your boots. You've scratched by with leaves, shivered through icy rinses, dodged overflowing cesspits, wrestled with rough cloth scraps, and endured the social gauntlet of shared facilities. But now, your gaze lifts to the grander end of the spectrum. How do the elite handle this messy business? Let's step into the slightly less grim world of royal and noble hygiene, where privilege offers a few perks, and see how you'd fare if you were rubbing elbows with the upper crust instead of slogging to the peasant muck. Imagine yourself no longer a weary farmer or cramped town dweller, but a guest in a noble's manor or even a royal castle. You've been invited, let's say for a feast or a minor audience, and as you pass through the stone archways, the air feels a touch less rancid than the village streets. The floors here aren't just packed dirt, they're flagstone, sometimes covered with rushes or woven mats, and the stench of waste isn't quite as overwhelming. When nature calls after a heavy meal of spiced venison and water wine, you're not shuffling to a public bench or a ditch. Instead, a servant might direct you to a private latrine, often called a garderobe, built into the castle wall. It's still just a hole over a chute or moat, mind you, but it's your hole, at least for the moment. A little modern snart to ease you in. If you've ever envied a VIP bathroom pass at a concert, this is the medieval equivalent, same basic function, just with fancier drafty walls and a title to match. Let's soak in the sensory shift for a bit. You're in this garderobe, a narrow nook jutting out from the castle's thick walls, the cold stone chilling your back as you perch on a wooden or stone seat. The chute below drops way straight outside, sometimes into a moat, sometimes just on the ground below, where it's someone else's problem. There's a faint breeze whistling through, which is both a blessing and a curse, carrying away some odor but reminding you how exposed this setup still is. If you're lucky, there's a scrap of cloth or even a wad of wool waiting nearby, provided by the household, a small luxury compared to foraging for leaves. You hear the distant clatter of kitchen staff and the murmur of noble gossip through the walls, but for once, you're not shoulder to shoulder with half the town. Here's a light chuckle to lighten the draft. Imagine bragging to your peasant pals about this. Oh, I relieved myself in the garderobe today. Private view and everything. They'd probably roll their eyes so hard they'd sprain something. Now, for a solid historical fact to anchor us. In medieval Europe, nobles and royals often had access to private latrines or garderobes in castles and manors, a significant step up from communal facilities or open ditches. These were built into the architecture, with chutes designed to channel waste away from living spaces. Though not always effectively, as moats and castle bases often became dumping grounds. By the High Middle Ages, larger states might even have piped water systems for basic cleaning or flushing, especially in wealthier regions like parts of France or England, though this was rare and mostly reserved for the elite. So, as you sit in this chilly nook, you're enjoying a rare privilege, one that sets the upper class apart in a world where hygiene is a constant struggle. Here's a quirky tidbit to make you grin. In some castles, garderobes were strategically placed near wardrobe rooms, hence the name, because the ammonia in human waste was believed to deter moths and fleas from stored clothing. Picture yourself catching a whiff of that distinct smell while a servant fetches a fur-lined cloak from the next room over. It's a bizarre kind of multitasking, and I can just see you wrinkling your nose, wondering if your fancy tunic is now flea-free or just permanently scented. It's an odd little crossover of hygiene and household management, showing how even the elite couldn't fully escape the mess of their era. And of course, there's room for scholarly debate. Historians still argue whether these private facilities were as common among the nobility as later accounts suggest, or if they were more of a status symbol reserved for the highest ranks. Some point to castle designs and records showing garderobes in many noble homes, while others argue that even wealthier households often relied on chamber pots and manual removal by servants, with privacy being more about who cleaned up than where you went. So, as you perch in this drafty luxury, are you truly in the lap of elite comfort, or just a slightly less embarrassing version of the same old mess? It's a question that keeps academics digging through castle ruins and old texts. You step out of the garderobe, feeling a smidge more dignified than you did in that communal latrine. Though the cold stone seat wasn't exactly a throne of comfort, you notice other small perks as you wander the manor. Servants haul water for washing hands or even bathing, sometimes warmed over fire if the Lord is particularly generous. There might be a basin with a lump of harsh soap made from animal fat, a luxury item most peasants can't dream of. You splash your face, the water feeling almost refreshing compared to the murky stream you're used to, though it's still far from a hot shower. Let's toss in another light joke to keep the mood up. Imagine a medieval noble reviewing their garderobe like a boutique hotel. For stars, great privacy, but the moat view needs work. You probably smirk while secretly agreeing. The differences don't stop at facilities, though. You're starting to see how hygiene ties into social hierarchy. If you're a noble or even a favored guest, someone else deals with the dirty work. Servants empty chamber pots, clean cloths, scrub basins. You don't have to haul your own water or rinse your own scraps. That's beneath you. A modern aside to connect with you. Think about how we outsource cleaning today, hiring services or buying gadgets to avoid the grunt work. Now imagine your entire hygiene routine resting on the shoulders of overworked staff who'd rather be anywhere else. It's privilege, medieval style, built on someone else's labor. As you linger in this slightly cleaner corner of the medieval world, you're struck by how relative clean is here. Even with a private latrine and a basin of water, the smells of waste and smoke still seep through the castle walls. You're not immune to the era's grime, just slightly removed from its worst edges. And here's one more joke to round things off. Picture a royal hygiene consultant pitching scented candles for garderobes. Transform your privy into a lavender oasis. The king might knight you or banish you for wasting good wax. But beyond the small comforts, there's a mental shift in this elite space. You're not just experiencing better hygiene. You're wearing it as a badge of status. Clean hands, a private moment, a servant's labor. These aren't just conveniences. They're proof of your place above the common filth. It's a stark contrast to the communal chaos you've endured. A reminder that even in a dirty world, money and rank can buy you a thinner layer of grime. You're starting to see how deeply inequality shapes every facet of life here, down to the most basic human needs. So, you step away from the stone walls of the manor, the distant sound of minstrels' lute and clinking goblets fading as you return to the broader reality of this era. You've glimpsed the hygiene perks of the elite, a small but telling window into how privilege plays out. But there's more to this unwashed story, more layers of medieval life waiting to unfold. The smells and struggles still hover nearby, a nudge that even noble comforts can't erase the era's mess. Hang with me, and let's keep peeling back the gritty details of this fascinating past. Chapter 8. You're still wandering through the uneven paths of this medieval world. The contrast between peasant grit and noble perks fresh in your mind. You've scratched by with leaves, endured icy splashes, sidestepped cesspit disasters, wrestled with rough cloths, braved communal latrines, and glimpsed the slightly cleaner life of the elite. But now, a darker thought creeps in as you notice a villager coughing weakly by a doorway, their face pale and drawn. How does all this filth connect to health? Let's delve into the grim reality of poor sanitation and its link to medieval disease, and see how you'd fare in a world where a simple cut or a sip of water could turn deadly. Imagine yourself back in the heart of the village, the air heavy with that familiar mix of waste, smoke, and unwashed bodies. You're hauling a bucket from the communal well. Try not to think about what's floating in it when you pass a cluster of folks whispering about a neighbor who's fallen ill. Fever, chills, a rash. They're tossing around words like pestilence or bad humors, and you feel a prickle of unease. There's no hospital to run to, no antibiotics in your pocket. Just a vague hope that whatever's going around skips your doorstep. The streets are slick with runoff from last night's rain, mixing waste into puddles you can't avoid stepping through, and you're starting to connect the dots between this mess and the sickness creeping through the town. A little modern snark to ground you. If you've ever freaked out over a missed flu shot, just wait until your only defense is a prayer and a sprig of dubious herbs. You'd be speed dialing your doctor if you could. Let's linger on the sensory weight of this moment. You're splashing through that murky puddle, the cold seeping into your worn boots, while the sour stench of rot wafts up from the ground. Nearby, a pig roots through a pile of kitchen scraps and worse, scattering bits into the water source you'll drink from later. You hear a child's ragged cough from a nearby hovel, the sound carrying over the clatter of a cartwheel, and see a woman dumping a chamber pot out a window, barely missing a passerby. It's a perfect storm of filth, and your stomach churns, not just from the smell, but from the nagging fear that this grime is more than an annoyance. It's a threat. Here's a light chuckle to ease the tension. Imagine trying to enforce a medieval wash your hands campaign. You'd be handing out lye soap like candy, only for half the village to use it as cooking fat instead. Now, for a solid historical fact to anchor us, poor sanitation in medieval Europe was a major contributor to widespread disease, with contaminated water and unmanaged waste fostering outbreaks of illnesses like dysentery, cholera, and typhoid fever. Records from the period, though often incomplete, show high mortality rates in towns and cities where waste was dumped into streets or rivers. Sometimes up to half the population could perish in a single epidemic. The Black Death, peaking in the mid-14th century, killed millions and was exacerbated by cramped, unsanitary conditions that allowed fleas and rats to thrive. So, as you trudge through this filthy village, you're walking through a petri dish of medieval pathogens, where a simple drink from the wrong stream could land you in a straw bed for weeks or worse. Here's a quirky tidbit to raise an eyebrow. Medieval folks often blame disease on miasmas, bad air thought to emanate from rotting matter or swamps, rather than the actual contaminated water or physical filth around them. Picture yourself joining a group of villagers burning pungent herbs or waving vinegar-soaked cloths to cleanse the air, while the real culprit, a polluted well, sits untouched just yards away. It's almost comical in hindsight, and I can see you shaking your head, muttering, "Guys, it's not the vibe, it's the water," while they side-eye you for questioning ancient wisdom. It's a strange window into how limited understanding shaped their response to very real dangers. And of course, there's room for scholarly debate. Historians still argue whether medieval people had any inkling of the link between sanitation and disease, or if their reliance on miasma theory and divine punishment completely blinded them to practical causes. Some point to early town regulations, like edicts banning waste dumping in certain areas, as evidence of rudimentary awareness, while others argue these were more about aesthetics or property disputes than health concerns. So, as you dodge another dubious puddle, are you surrounded by folks who don't know better, or ones who know but lack the means to act? It's a puzzle that keeps academics sifting through old charters and burial records. You keep moving, but the signs of illness are harder to ignore. You pass a hovel where a family huddles inside, one of them wrapped in a thin blanket, shivering despite the mild day. You've heard rumors of entire villages being wiped out by plagues, and though you don't grasp the science of germs, you sense the danger in the air, or maybe in the water you're still forced to drink. Let's toss in another light joke to cut the gloom. Imagine pitching a medieval public health ad. Stay safe. Boil your water. You'd probably get accused of witchcraft for suggesting fire could fix anything but dinner. It's a grim laugh, but you need it right now. The health hazards aren't just about epidemics, though. You notice a small cut on your hand from chopping wood yesterday, already red and tender, because you've got no clean way to wash it. Infection is a constant shadow, as common as the dirt under your nails, and a minor scrape can turn into a life or death gamble with no doctor to stitch you up. A modern aside to connect with you. Think about how we pop into a clinic for a quick antibiotic today. Now imagine your only option is a village healer muttering over a poultice of questionable mud and herbs, while you pray it doesn't make things worse. It's a stark reminder of how fragile life is here, without the safety net you're used to. As the day drags on, you're more aware than ever the toll this filth takes. Your throat feels scratchy, maybe from the dust, maybe from something worse, and every creak in your joints makes you wonder if it's just fatigue or the start of something you can't fight. You're surrounded by people who've lost family to fevers and fluxes, and the weight of that loss hangs heavier than the smell. Here's one more joke to lift the mood. Picture yourself as a medieval germaphobe, scrubbing with river water every 5 minutes. The villagers would nickname you Sir Soapless, and probably bet on how long before you keel over anyway. But beyond the physical risks, there's a mental burden to this unsanitary life. You're not just living in filth. You're living with fear, a quiet dread that the next sip, the next touch, could bring something you can't outrun. You're learning to shrug it off, to keep moving because stopping to worry won't change a thing, but it chips away at you. It's a world where health isn't a guarantee or even a hope sometimes, just a roll of the dice with every muddy step. So you shuffle past that coughing villager, the distant toll of a church bell pulling you back to moment. You felt the heavy link between poor sanitation and medieval disease, a harsh truth that turns every grimy corner into a gamble. But there's more to this unwashed story, more facets of life waiting to reveal their raw edges. The smells and struggles still cling to you, a reminder that survival here is a battle against more than just dirt. Stay with me, and let's keep uncovering the complex, messy layers of this fascinating past. Chapter 9. You're still treading to the rough and tumble of this medieval landscape, the weight of disease and filth pressing down on you as much as the muddy paths underfoot. You've scratched by with leaves, endured frigid baths, dodged overflowing cesspits, wrestled with coarse cloths, braved awkward communal latrines, glimpsed noble privileges, and felt the shadow of illness lurking in every contaminated corner. But now, let's shift to a stranger, more intangible layer of this world. How did medieval folks even think about hygiene? Let's explore the peculiar cultural beliefs and quirks tying cleanliness to morality, spirituality, and superstition, and see how you navigate a mindset where washing up isn't just about the body, but about the soul. Imagine yourself sitting by a crackling fire in a village tavern, the air thick with the smell of stale ale and unwashed wool. You're nursing a cracked mug of weak brew, listening to a grizzled old woman spin tales about why bathing too often is a sin. She's adamant. Too much water opens the pores to evil spirits or invites vanity, a sure path to damnation. Around the rough-hewn table, others gnawed sagely, muttering about how filth can be a sign of holy humility, while cleanliness might mark you as prideful or worse, a heretic. You're torn between wanting to scrub off the day's grime and worrying that a dip in the stream might label you as suspicious. A little modern snart to ease you in. If you've ever skipped a shower and called it vintage vibes, you fit right in here, except these folks mean it literally, with a side of eternal judgment. Let's linger on the sensory and social texture of this moment. The tavern's dim glow casts flickering shadows on soot-streaked walls, and the straw scattered on the floor sticks to your damp boots, adding to the grimy feel you can't shake. You shift on the hard bench, feeling the itch of days without a proper wash, while the old woman's voice drones on about how saints embrace dirt as a sign of piety. You catch a whiff of yourself, sweat mixed with the smoky air, and wonder if you're unintentionally holy or just plain unlucky. The crowd's murmurs grow as someone mentions a local healer who swears washing hands before meals angers the spirits of the harvest. Here's a light chuckle to cut through. Imagine arguing with them. Look, soap's not the devil, I swear. You'd probably get a lecture on demons hiding in bubbles before they toss you out for heresy. Now, for a solid historical fact to ground us, in medieval Europe, cleanliness was often intertwined with religious and moral beliefs, particularly within Christian doctrine. Bathing and hygiene could be seen as suspect, tied to vanity or pagan Roman excess, especially in early medieval monastic writings. Some religious texts praise asceticism, living simply, even filthily, as a path to godliness, while public bathhouses, when they existed, were sometimes viewed with suspicion as places of vice rather than virtue. So, as you sit in this smoky tavern, you're surrounded by a worldview where a scrub might cleanse your skin but risk staining your soul, a stark contrast to our modern obsession with daily showers. Here's a quirky tidbit to make you smirk. In some medieval communities, particularly among certain religious sects, there was a belief that specific diseases or misfortunes came from washing during sacred times, like full moons or holy days. Picture yourself sneaking a quick rinse by the river, glancing over your shoulder to make sure no one spots you violating some unspoken lunar taboo. You're half laughing at the absurdity, muttering, "Sorry, moon, didn't mean to offend," while hoping the village doesn't blame you for the next crop failure. It's a weird blend of superstition and practicality, showing how much of medieval life was shaped by unseen forces rather than tangible logic. And of course, there's room for scholarly debate. Historians still argue whether these cultural attitudes toward hygiene were universally held or varied wildly by region, class, and religious influence. Some point to monastic rules that mandated regular washing for spiritual purity, like in certain Benedictine orders, while others highlight sermons decrying cleanliness as a gateway to sin. There's also the question of how much these beliefs influence daily behavior. Did you avoid bathing because of morality or just because hauling water was a pain? It's a nuanced topic, much like the muddy grime on your hands, and one that keeps academics poring over dusty manuscripts. You lean back against the tavern wall, the old woman's tales fading into the general hum of clinking mugs and tired voices, but her words stick with you. You're starting to see how deeply these beliefs shape even the smallest choices. You hesitate before wiping your face with a damp rag, wondering if someone's watching and judging. Maybe that it isn't just dirt. Maybe it's the weight of unseen eyes, earthly and divine, tallying your sins with every splash. Let's toss in another light joke to keep things airy. Imagine a medieval confessional booth where you admit, "Father, I bathed twice this month." The priest might gasp louder than if you'd stolen a loaf. It's a small laugh, but it helps amidst this strange moral maze. The cultural quirks extend beyond just bathing. You overhear someone at the next table swearing that wearing the same unwashed tunic for weeks wards off plague. Something about the protective layer of grime. You're tempted to argue, remembering the sick villager you passed earlier, but you bite your tongue. Disputing local wisdom might earn you a reputation as a troublemaker, or worse, someone touched by dark forces. A modern aside to connect with you. Think about how we cling to health fads today. Kombucha cures or detox cleanses. Now imagine your fad is don't wash, it's lucky, backed by zero science and a whole lot of faith. It's a different kind of wellness trend, one you're living firsthand. As night falls, the tavern crowd thins, and you're left with the lingering unease of these odd beliefs. You're bone tired, the day's labor and dirt weighing on your shoulders, but the thought of cleaning up feels like a risk in itself. Will the village gossip about your vanity? Will some unseen spirit take offense? You're caught between the physical need for relief and the cultural nets that snare even that simple act. And here's one more joke to round it out. Picture yourself pitching a medieval self-help book, Wash Your Way to Heaven. You'd be burned at the stake before the first copy sold. But hey, it'd be a clean exit. But beyond the oddities and superstitions, there's a profound realization settling in. Hygiene here isn't just a personal choice. It's a cultural battleground, a place where body and belief collide. You're not just dirty. You're navigating a world where dirt carries meaning, where every rinse or refusal shapes how others see you. It's a layer of medieval life as complex as the grime on your skin, a reminder that even the most basic acts are steeped in something deeper. So, as the fire in the tavern dims and the last voices fade into the night, let's ease into a slower rhythm. You're feeling the weight of this long, unwashed journey, each step through muddy streets and strange ideas leaving its mark. Let's take a moment to breathe, to let the smoky air and distant creak of the village settle around you like a soft blanket. Picture yourself curling up on a straw pallet, the day's grit still clinging to your skin, but your mind drifting toward rest. The smells of sweat and ale blur into a quiet hum, the medieval world softening the edges as your eyelids grow heavy. You wander through a past both harsh and fascinating, from leaf-littered ditches to noble garderobes, from plague-shadowed alleys to fireside superstitions. Now, let the tension slip away, each breath longer and gentler, as the grime of history fades into a whisper. You're safe here, tucked into this moment. No need to fight the filth or fear the unseen. Just rest, letting the murmur of an ancient village lull you deeper, a calm tide carrying you toward sleep. Sweet dreams await, a quiet escape from the mess, as you float into the hush of night.